Good morning and welcome to the second day of this fantastic forum. I'm very grateful to be here and grateful to the NEH and Chairman Leach for inviting me. My name is Rachel GOSLINS and I'm the Executive Director of the President's Committee on the Arts and the Humanities. I'm very excited about our panel this morning. We're fortunate to have with us many experts in the field of dance, theater, opera, and film, which put together are some of my favorite things in the world. Like many of the moderators who went before me, I am particularly excited not only about hearing the presentations of our distinguished panelists, but also the opportunity to have some interesting discussion at the end of the session. So as hard as it is, I ask everybody to limit their initial remarks to about 10 minutes. This has added urgency since I've been told there's a bus coming to pick everybody up at the end of the lunch, so we want to make sure everybody makes the bus. We had a wonderful day of thought-provoking discussion yesterday, as I was preparing for this session, I was thinking about what was particular to our topic here, and two things came to mind. First, yesterday we covered the literary and visual arts, which are very rich veins of exploration. But this morning we are talking about the performing arts. And the performing arts are unique in this spectrum because they are, by definition, the arts that require an audience. They not only invite, but compel a shared experience, a narrative that everyone in the darkened theater believes in at the same time. That is, if the actor or the singer or the dancer is doing their job. And there is something very powerful in this. And as I listened to the distinguished speakers from yesterday expand on their subjects, it was very interesting to hear two strands of thought and two strands of cultural approaches to the arts emerge. On one hand, there's a desire for individualist expression, for conflict and resolution, and on the other, for harmony and unity of purpose. The performing arts, at their best, achieve both of these ideals. They express important and sometimes provocative concepts through the linear extension of a dancer or the quiet monologue of an actor, and yet they create a sacred space where the whole audience is on the same journey together. And in that space, many things can be communicated and many things resolved in perfect harmony. In addition, the great thing about an audience is that it keeps the artist honest night after night. I know many distinguished artists and scholars have been quoted at this conference, from Confucius to Walt Whitman, but I'm going to lower the bar a little bit by quoting from of all the people who you wouldn't expect to be quoted at a conference on Sino-American cultural relations, Barbra Streisand. Barbara said, "The audience is the best judge of anything. They cannot be lied to. The truth brings them closer. And if a moment lags, they're going to cough." So thank you all for not coughing yet. I'm almost done. The second thing that was interesting as I thought about the panel this morning is specific to the genre of film, which is a particular passion of mine. So bear with me. In almost all of the artistic disciplines we've discussed over these 2 days, painting, sculpture, poetry, theater, well, the Chinese have a head start on the Americans by at least 4 centuries. You were perfecting the craft in many of these disciplines before we were even a gleam in our founding fathers' eyes. But film is the only discipline that was born in both of our countries at the same time. The first moving pictures were shown to an American audience in 1896, and by 1905, the first Chinese film was made, which was a recording of the Beijing Opera. So this is an area where I think a comparative analysis will be especially interesting to learn about the different ways in which our two countries have taken the same tool and used it to shape their culture in different or similar ways. And I look forward to Leilei's discussion on this topic. But first, let's go back in time a little bit, perhaps even to whatever the Beijing Opera was playing that night in 1905, and hear from our distinguished guest, Zhen, the director of the Chinese Opera Institute of the Chinese National Academy of the Arts.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Very glad that I have given this opportunity to attend this forum. Yesterday, I heard excellent speeches by experts both sides, and I got inspiration from all those speeches. Today, here, I would like to talk about the cultural development in China. I would like to touch a little bit. First of all, the culture is a very important milestone in the human development. We know that humankind, experienced different. First, we from agriculture and then industrial modernization, and now we are going to this modern high-tech industry era. In my opinion, the word culture appeared very early. When we look at the book in the Han Dynasty, there's a definition about culture. Culture is very important factors in the society. Even during the Han Dynasty, something is higher than even the modern civilization. So the society has been experienced thousands of years, but even the definition of culture in the Han Dynasty, even the content, maybe nowadays is become richer, but then the basic elements of culture still maintain as today. We have experienced involvement and development to this day, but we still want to pursue more culture, and we're longing for more diversity of our culture. A very famous Chinese scholar, Mr. Fei Xiaotong, he did very in-depth research in the humanity and culture. But in his many speeches and articles, he said he was still longing for an era of art. So as an artist, if that word came from an artist, maybe we won't feel surprised. But from a scholar who is specialized in humanity and social problems, we are impressed. It seems people focus too much on materials, and then yet this Professor Mr. Fei, his idea, he approves he's a person of vision. So a lot of countries, people have the same longings. A former Prime Minister of Japan in 1979, during his inauguration speech, he said Japan has entered into a culture era. He advocated that after 70 years of economic growth in Japan, he believes that we need to turn those the attention shift from the economic development into the culture exchange and the contribution to the. Secondly, I want to talk about it's time for China to also focus on its culture development. and we can play a very important role. The economic development in China and the economic power in China, after all those years of opening up, China, whether it's on its economic development or its scientific development or even its whole economic strength, we have improved a lot, and we have won the recognition of the whole world. That's why I believe that it's time for us to also shift and also promote our culture into a high level. Also in politics, President Hu, that is the 17th Party Conference report, he mentioned that he will promote a wide range of cultural development exchange. I believe because we have the support of our economic power. So we have the foundation. We can promote. So President Hu said about promote widespread of cultural development. Also, because of the emphasis and the support of the different levels of the government, we also have done a lot of job in protecting our cultural heritage. We have achieved a lot in that regard. Especially in the last few years, as for the protection of our cultural heritage, we have achieved very significant progress. The government of different levels, the central government, the provincial government, we have also selected a catalog of all those sites and historic relics that we should pay attention and we should protect. So we have done significant work in the cultural development and protecting of our historical sites. But it also illustrates that the quality of the people and the people conscientiously started to realize how important the culture is to us, and also the education of culture. We have improved a lot. As I said, China is at the time that we are welcoming, we are looking forward to a cultural era. I want to say that we have all the conditions are ready. We are facing still a very big task, a daunting task. For example, including how to change the cultural system, how the government can help. Of course, we are talking the government level, but for the society level, especially how to have every citizen of the country have the responsibility to encourage them to promote our culture, to be ready for this, I call it cultural era, what every one of us as a citizen can do. We have a lot of work to do, a lot of efforts to make. So the cultural consciousness, this cultural responsibility, is not something that can be done by a small group of people or by a small group of elite cultural experts. Lastly, the cultural development and then the traditional culture. we are going to enter in this cultural era. It should be a multicultural, multi-layered era. It should include very rich content, should be including contemporary culture, foreign culture, and minority culture. All those should be part of this culture era. In my opinion, the traditional culture and art played a dominant role in this cultural development, and it's the base, the foundation of this culture era. This is the precondition of the new culture system. After 1949, we basically have experienced three stages. First, 1950s and 60s, shortly after the New China, in the area of traditional and folk art, the government has tried to lead this folk and traditional arts from spontaneous mode into more organized way. For example, those artists, before the liberation, their social status were very low. Like Beijing Opera, those four famous actresses, even though they achieved very early on, they were very famous, the economic income pretty good, but in reality, in the society, because they were just Beijing Opera actress or actor, they had very limited social status. 1931, Chen Yanqiu, he was a master in Beijing Opera. When he visited Europe, after 1949, no matter it's traditional art or it's opera, the whole status of those performing arts has been upgraded into the art level. All those masters or actors and actresses involved in those arts, they are considered to be real, like people's artists. They have been given that honor, they're given that title. In the 1950s and 60s, because of the social system, because of the change of the social system, because of the protection, of the emphasis on the traditional arts, big changes have changed. So in the 1950s and 60s, we had reform. It's not that the reform the 50s and 60s that has no error or no mistakes, but overall, when we look back, the reform during that time, we did make a lot of efforts, and we have achieved a lot. What we had done, not only we have put a lot of conscious efforts, we have also achieved the goal that we set at that time. A second stage, in the 1970s, end of 1970s, all the way to the 1980s and 1990s. For the second stage, we have compiled a lot of books and also try to transmit we compiled a lot of books written down all these traditional arts. We had a campaign, the whole world, to protect those traditional arts and traditional culture. because after the Cultural Revolution, we have destroyed a lot of our own very excellent traditional arts. But then after the 1970s, we have done a lot of work, try to save all those precious works by writing them down on books and publish those books. The completion and publication of those books at that time was considered as like a great wall of a cultural great wall. The third stage, after we enter the 21st century, Kun opera was chosen as the also cultural heritage by the UNESCO in 2002. This is also one of the jobs that the government has done to protect our cultural heritage. So it's a very good first step, to promote our Chinese style ideologies, cultural ideology. Because of the time constraints, I can only very quickly express some of my thoughts here.
Well, thank you very much for that. Moving right along, the next person we'll hear from is Claire CONCEISON, the professor of theater studies at Duke University. Claire?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me?
A little closer.
Is the mic on? Okay, thank you. First, like many others, I'd like to thank Chairman Leach for this opportunity, and also Vice Minister Wang, and 4 fabulous women who worked really hard for this conference, Rachel GOSLINS, Candace Katz, Eva Caldera, and Judy Regelman. I'm very grateful to them. I also want to acknowledge Michelle Vosper, who's here today from the Asian Cultural Council, because the Asian Cultural Council is one of the most important organizations that exists for funding cultural bridging, artistic exchange between not only the US and China, but throughout Asia. And they have funded my own research several times, but more importantly, they've funded numerous colleagues and friends of mine in the theater community in China. And the results of those fellowships and residencies and collaborations have really transformed much of the activity happening in China. So I want to thank you and the Council for that, and encourage people to dialogue with Michelle. Experiences like this conference, I think, are crucial to building bridges of cultural exchange. And I'm really happy to see old friends here today like Mo Yan, and to see Michelle, and to meet people I've admired for a long time, like Jonathan Spence, but also to make new friendships and meet new people, because I think that the energy that comes from these new networks leads to future collaborations and wonderful connections. So 我很高兴见到老的朋友，也很高兴认识新的朋友们，谢谢。I kept my bio for the program brief. It mentions some of my scholarly work and indicates that I also work as a translator, but it does not mention my work as a director of plays, and I think my work artistically is also significant in this context. My comments today, which I will also try to keep brief, are from the perspective of all of these things. As a scholar, I've spent my career thus far as a witness to and interpreter of cultural exchange between the US and China, as a translator of plays, and as an occasional interpreter for Sino-Western theater collaborations during periods when I happen to be living in China. I am a facilitator of cultural exchange, and as a director of contemporary Chinese plays in English translation for American audiences, I am a creator of cultural exchange. So I think these perspectives offer me a unique vantage point and often make me a bridge, which is a very exciting but extremely complex position to be in. After hearing the talks from yesterday and from my fellow panelists, I think the most valuable insights that I can offer to these proceedings are twofold. I can illuminate, first of all, for those unfamiliar with contemporary theater in China, some of the most significant work happening there. And second, I can offer some food for thought about how Sino-American cultural exchanges, and particularly artistic exchanges, and specifically in the theater, can become more successful. In doing so, I invoke the rich comments of many of my colleagues here this weekend. Yudan addressed the importance of understanding cultural difference. An Ping-chin addressed the importance of translated texts and their circulation. Mo Yan indicated that in some artistic forms, specifically literature, language and translation play a vital role compared to other artistic forms, such as music or dance. And I would include theater in this category, where language, the text, and linguistic communication is extremely important. Jonathan Spence pointed out that the cross-cultural relationships we form are influenced by the historical point of the primary encounter. And Andrew Delbanco made reference to the missionary spirit of American culture. And finally, Lawrence Rinder exposed the false dichotomy between tradition and innovation. From my experience in Sino-American cross-cultural theater exchange, all of these things come into play in very significant ways. Personally, I encountered China and Chinese theater at a point when it was gaining strength, in the mid-1980s, when China was opening, reforming, and theater artists were experimenting domestically and beginning to travel abroad. Thus, personally, I see Chinese artists as having great vitality and agency and innovative power. However, I believe that Professor Spence is correct that the U.S.-China relationship began with China in a point of weakness historically, particularly vis-a-vis the West. And I do believe that this originary point of encounter, in spite of China's great artistic, economic, and military strength today, still form the basis of how most American artists who know very little about China encounter China today when they travel there for international exchange projects. And this is something I've witnessed over the past 20 years, time and time again in China, and I'd be happy to answer questions about it during the Q&A, because my time is limited to actually share some of those experiences. Lawrence Rinder's insightful comments yesterday also brought to mind for me the fact that most foreigners equate Chinese culture with, quote, traditional, and the West with modern. And in fact, we saw this binary play out somewhat in presentations that we heard yesterday, with a heavy emphasis on Confucius and Lao Tzu and traditional Chinese painting compared to kind of modernist movements in the West. But the China that I encounter in my theater work is extremely modern and innovative. And that is, of course, influenced by the fact that I specialize in Huaju, or Chinese spoken drama. And so theater forms that were imported deliberately from the West at the turn of the 20th century as part of a new culture movement, and that sought to help China catch up to the West, and also to address social issues and kind of transform Chinese culture. So from its very inception, the kind of theater that I study, which I guess you would call Western-style theater in China, or spoken drama, vis-a-vis the opera forms that Liu Zhen was addressing, their impetus was to forge an encounter between the West and China, and it was brought to China by Chinese intellectuals, not through colonialism, not through Western influence, and that's very significant too. But it's been absorbed, and it's been Sinified, and it's been used in incredibly interesting ways by Chinese artists since it was brought in. And I think I'll share a tiny anecdote at this point, because Thursday, I was at Stanford University giving a lecture. And while I was there, my students had class, and it's a Chinese theater and society class where it's mostly an academic class of reading texts and discussing them. But I gave them one kind of on-your-feet theater project while I was away that they could work on. And so they were creating scenes from the 4 plays that we've read so far, which I consider to be 4 of the formative plays, pre-Cultural Revolution plays in China in this Western form. And so the 4 plays that they're working on, and their assignment is to form groups and choose a scene from one of the plays and then transform it and adapt it into another cultural context, so very much a cultural bridging project. But the 4 plays that were so influential on the Chinese stage are Uncle Tom's Cabin, A Doll's House, Thunderstorm, and Tea House. And only 2 of those 4 are written by Chinese playwrights. One is Lin Shu, who Mo Yan mentioned yesterday, adapted Uncle Tom's Cabin into a play, and that was the very first spoken drama performed by Chinese actors while they were overseas students in Japan. And then A Doll's House, of course, is Ibsen's work from Norway, which was translated and then produced on stage in China. So there's this mixture. People like Cao Yu and Lao She were borrowing from these Western forms, but also adding very Chinese elements. And I just don't see a distinctive binary between what is Western and what is Chinese once forms are imported and artists begin dialogues. Those lines become very blurred, and I think happily so. So I don't have time today to give you an overview of the many playwrights, directors, and other cultural workers that I work alongside in China and the incredible work that I observe them doing. But I'd like to introduce you to 3 of them today who I think are wonderful examples of cultural bridges that we can emulate. There are 4 Chinese theater people, among, again, the many I work with, that I feel particularly fortunate to work with, to have worked with or be working with. And I work with them very closely. One is Zhen, who's lived in France for the past 20 years, but whose plays were hugely influential in the experimental period of the mid-1980s. And for the past 5 years, I've been working with him on a project about his French language plays, so the plays that he has written since his exile in France and how they are received globally. And I translated one of those a few years ago. Secondly, Meng Jinghui, who is kind of the transformative stage director in China, in Beijing, for the past 20 years, and has really changed the face of theater there, brought huge young audiences to the stage and really energized dialogue about theater, about the avant-garde, about commercialization, and many other things in China. And right now I'm editing an anthology of his works, but also have been working closely with him since 1993. And then Yu Rongjun, who is a Shanghai-based playwright. He's the most produced living playwright in China today, and really has his finger on the pulse of modern contemporary urban life in China, and writes in many different genres, ranging from monologues to unspoken experimental pieces, to realism, to Juxuanlu, main melody plays, to documentary theater. He did an incredible play after the earthquake in Wenchuan called Heartquake, which was based on witness accounts of the event. And then finally, Ying Ruocheng, who is no longer with us. He passed away at the end of 2003, but I was very fortunate to work alongside him during the last 3 years of his life on his autobiography. And I'll start with Ying Ruocheng because some of you knew him, and I believe that Ying, more than anyone else, represents what we would want a cultural bridge between the U.S. and China to be. There is nobody, in my opinion, like Ying Ruocheng around today, but I'm really hoping that this generation will produce some more people like him. He had a very unique educational background, being raised in a family of a distinguished Manchu Catholic intellectual who had risen from an illiterate Manchu family. He was an actor, a director, but I think for our purposes, importantly, a translator of plays, both from Chinese to English and English to Chinese. And he became Vice Minister of Culture from 1986 to 1990. So Vice Minister Wang, who was here yesterday, and I had the pleasure of being introduced to him last night by Chairman Leach, told me that Ying Ruocheng was his boss at the Ministry of Culture when he was still living, and that Wang started out in the theater section of the Ministry of Culture and then rose from there. And Ying Ruocheng was known as Wenhua Dashi, or the cultural ambassador of China. It was a kind of an informal title that he was given because of the great efforts that he made between China and the United Kingdom, and China and the United States, and also Europe more broadly, in bringing Chinese culture to the West and bringing Western culture to China. He's very famous for his collaboration with Arthur Miller in 1983 on the production of Death of a Salesman. He translated that play, talked Arthur Miller into going, arranged the whole gig, and also played Willie Loman at Miller's insistence, and served as Miller's kind of informal interpreter. Miller had an official interpreter, but he felt that Ying Ruocheng was able to simultaneously interpret without taking a breath. And this is an incredibly difficult skill, and our simultaneous translators are doing a heroic job this weekend at something that can appear seamless but is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And I want to get to that issue of language in just a moment. So Ying Ruocheng's autobiography is available both in English and Chinese, and if you want to learn more about him, I think he's a great model for us. But he was a very sensitive man, a very charismatic man, but he also was a very honest man. He was very candid in an elegant way that didn't offend people, but he was able to really get at issues and also take risks at a time in the late 80s when it was he took great personal risk in making some of the decisions he did in innovating cultural exchanges with China and the United States, great political risk. But he was always willing to take those because what he loved more than anything was languages and the coming together of cultures and mutual understanding. And that sounds very kind of fluffy and idealistic, but he was able to tangibly put that on the ground and make it work. And I think that's what we should all be trying to do. Meng Jinghui, many of you, who is familiar with Meng Jinghui here? He's a very famous young maverick guy in Beijing right now. But I think what's significant for us is his adaptation of Western works, ranging from Waiting for Godot to The Balcony to Mayakovsky's The Bedbug to, two films that he adapted for the stage could not be more different. Fassbinder's Love is Colder Than Death and Billy Wilder's The Apartment. So, one director handling both of those texts is quite interesting. But he's also innovated theatrical forms within China. So his 空中花园谋杀案, or the murder case of the Hanging Gardens Apartments, is a new kind of musical in China, and also 三个句子的爱情, The Love of Three Oranges, which of course brings to mind the Goldoni text, but he didn't borrow too much from the Goldoni text besides the title, and he has kind of a rock band on stage, and then they leave their instruments and play the roles. So he's trying to innovate with both Western and Chinese forms. 四番, or Longing for Worldly Pleasures, is a mixture of Giovanni's Decameron texts with an old Ming Dynasty Kunxu, right, Sifan. And so he is experimenting with both cultures, but I would say more bringing Western forms to China and making them their own. And finally, Yu Rongjun, this playwright in Shanghai, he has an interesting dual role because he's a very productive playwright, almost too productive. He writes plays very quickly and they get produced very quickly. And I'm actually bringing him to Duke in the spring for a residency for 6 weeks so that we can slow him down and workshop one of his plays in English. And he can have, in China, there's no dramaturg. So the idea of a dramaturg working together with a playwright and actors and a director and developing a play is a new thing for them. Because there's other models that they've adopted from other places. So he's also, though, the marketing director and programming director of a major theater company in Shanghai, the Dramatic Arts Center, Huaju Yishu Zhongxin. And so he has an administrative role and an artistic role. And one of his jobs that he's so effective at is fostering international cultural exchange and also intra-Asia cultural exchange. He started the Asian Theater Festival that happens every fall. He jump-started the College Theater Festival that happens in Shanghai, and Meng Jinghui was a big factor in that starting in Beijing, and those just started a few years ago. But Yu Rongjun is constantly traveling abroad to festivals, bringing productions back to Shanghai, and trying to bring productions from Shanghai to the U.S. And so in beginning to close, one point I want to make, and that I made strongly in an article way back in 1995 in TDR, the Drama Review, as a graduate student, after being an interpreter for a Sino-U.S. production of the Joy Luck Club in Shanghai in 1993, was that our exchanges need to go both ways. We're very good at bringing foreigners to China to direct a play, to be a foreign expert, to show the Chinese how to do something. And that is somewhat problematic. It's a wonderful thing, but we need to bring more Chinese works to the United States. We need to bring Chinese directors and not require them to speak English in order for them to work here, because we don't require foreigners to speak Chinese to work in China. And we need to really take care to pay attention to the role of translation and language. The first spoken drama or Western-style play in China to ever come to the United States was not until 2005, after many, many decades of foreigners going to China and doing work. And that was Tea House that toured the United States. I did try to bring a Meng Jinghui play to Santa Barbara in 2002 to 2003, and it was all set to go, and then SARS happened, and the American side canceled and wouldn't bring the Chinese in because of SARS. It was very unfortunate. But it's a really new thing for us to bring Chinese plays. And I think one of the reasons is that we feel our audiences are reluctant to see a play in another language and read surtitles, or maybe a bigger problem, we're always looking at Chinese traditional arts, Beijing opera, other forms that we think are Chinese. Well, modern theater is very Chinese too. There's a really exciting urban work happening in China and other types of theater, and we should be interested in how they adapt Western classics and how they write their own stories about their own experiences, and we should want to see them. So I'd like to see more of that happening, as well as people just, striving for mutual respect, common goals, and deeper understanding of each other's cultures as they enter into partnerships and cultural exchanges. And to close with one sentence, when Billy Tian said yesterday that great works of art, just are, I think this is somewhat illusory. I think great works of art appear to just be if they're done well, but they don't just happen. They happen through sensitivity, deep knowledge, mutual collaborative spirit, and real consideration of diverse audiences and effective communication among these artists and to these audiences. So I hope that we will all strive for that in our future work. Thank you.
Great. It's my pleasure now to introduce Jianping, the Deputy Director and Research Fellow of the Dance Institute of the Chinese National Academy of the Arts.
大家好。
Good morning, everyone. Even though there's limited time, I still want to be grateful of this event for us to have this opportunity to discuss. I've been working on cultural exchanges for 2 decades. The most important aspect is I've been here for 4 times, and all of the 5 times I came in the name of dance critics. But as you know, in China, since the opening up in the past 3 decades, dance has developed very fastly in China, and there has been great influence from America. So I spend actually half of the time when I'm in China to learn modern dance. It's not necessarily for choreography or for dancing, but I want to try to bring back what I learned here to China. So I talk about dance exchange today. I have taught for 8 years in China on some of the American dance.
说不了个全的，所以随时可以打住。特别希望引起大家的关注呢，回头留意我们即将出版的论文集。
We also wrote an essay about this, and hopefully you get an opportunity to read it. So before that, I would like to talk about how I feel about kind of on the high level, some of the values. Understanding builds peace, and this is something I try to emphasize every day. As you know, on the world map, China and U.S. are very far apart. But as artists, every day I feel that we are bridging the distance, shortening the distance, including our differences on ideology. There's a very famous saying in dance, the body never lies. Said by Martha Graham, who actually, her father originally said that. As you know, dance is a non-verbal language. So it combines the heart and the body and presents in front of you right away, and you feel it instinctively. This is just like when you see a person for the first time, you have a first impression. So it's a very ancient body language, communicated instantly, and open up both sides. I'd like to show you a few pictures, which should be very interesting. The first one is coincidental. There's Edwin Denby, a dance critic. He was actually born in Tianjin in China, 1903. This is him. What's interesting is that his dance critique is rich of poetry. His dance descriptions are accurate and precise, but his poetry doesn't seem to be obvious, and we think that's influenced by his Chinese background. Actually, sorry, I didn't find a picture. Kang Youwei in China raised the notion of strengthen the body to save the country. So he advocated acrobats and modern sports and dance. So we should be grateful of an American PE teacher whose name is Abby Shore Mayhew. In 1912, from Wisconsin University, she came to China and taught at Young Women's Catholic Association. She was the first principal. She had, in many PE classes, she actually brought in dance. And then outstanding students from that program were selected to come to the U.S. and to learn sports and dance. As we know, for example, there are Gaozi and Zhang Huilan. Another example, the Dan Shan, who had the first dance exchange program. We may all know Duncan, but Ruth Dennis and Ted Sean, a couple, in 1925 to 26, they had a tour of Asia, which included China. When they got to Beijing, they were very moved. They had a meeting with Mei Lanfang, the Peking opera master. Mr. Mei Lanfang is seen as an opera master, but in Western dance, he's considered to be a dance master because in the 30s, he performed in the U.S. There's a precious photo here, not seen in China. This was in 1925. The Shans took a photo with him. And their troupe members, they learned some moves from Mr. Mei, and they created something similar in their own style. There's another. When they visited the Temple of Heaven, they were so moved, they were moved to tears. Temple of Heaven, which is on the logo of the Olympics. They got great inspiration, and they created a piece of dance called Jade Buddha. You can look at it. The feel of the feel of it. It's a dance, actually. It looks like a painting. This is a closer up. This kind of mysterious spirit carried out perfectly. Very remarkable. Another example. Duncan, we talked about Duncan. Many people said she visited Duncan, but she actually never visited China. Her disciple, one of her disciples did. Who brought some students from Russia. She's a revolutionary character, and she's sympathetic of the Chinese Revolution, especially that in Wuhan. And she choreographed several stories. For example, Long Live Women's Emancipation. They're marching with the red flag. And it was a huge scene. And she received a scarf from Madame Song for that. Another anecdote, Hollywood movies, especially musicals, Broadway musicals, were very popular. Shirley Temple. She had so many fans, old and young. Here's a funny. In Shanghai, in the 20s and 30s, which is about like Hong Kong in the 70s and 80s, emerged a young star. Nobody would think that she became a ballet star later on. I bought a DVD of her childhood dance imitating Shirley Temple. And it's about the red envelope money when kids receive during the Spring Festival. She danced a tap dance imitating Shirley Temple. Very, very cute. Let's take a look. Look at me. About the same age, 5 or 6. Shanghai is a cultural haven at the time. Many different art forms blossoming. She sings and dances. Can we raise the sound? Her name is Hu Rongrong. She's singing about I will take good care of my red envelope money. I will not waste it. Now the tap part. Unfortunately, they were not focusing on the feet. Very agile legs. Leilei is an expert. Now she's going upstairs.
难为这孩子。好，这个女演员是当时
And this actress is a very famous actress in Shanghai, Gong Qiuxia, and now they dance together. It's just like Shirley Temple dancing with Bill Robinson,
但只是把那个男的变成一个女的了。
except that this is an actress. So that was that.
大家知道，
As you know,
在这个怎么说呢，就是20世纪以来，就中国
since the 20th century,
一部分，而且
China has been part of the world.
项目之前，
And in my research
很多事情在
today,
从规模上啊，
whether it's in scale or in all kinds of aspects,
常常说
we all say that
时代
today,
happy 的一个
the present day is the happiest
看
time.
一看历史就知道。
But if you look back in history, in the 20s and the 30s,
在很多程度，比如说对外交流这个频密的程度上来，
there were very active
又想起一个
exchange and life was very lively.
27年在美国一出，28年就有了中国版本，然后在
For example,
4个版本出现。
Autobiography of sorry, I forgot what she said, but it was translated in China the very next year. So the exchange has never. The exchange was very strong. Has been very strong. Another example, Along, a Jewish composer. Another one, an American journalist, Agnes Smedley. To everyone's surprise, one at a low point of U.S.-China relationship, she went to Yan'an, which is the base of the revolution. She went there to teach the leaders ballroom dancing. A very interesting story. And even Virginia folk dance. But that caused, of course, some chaos, because that caused a great fury from the leaders' wives. Zhu, which is the general, danced with me, which lifted the veil. Premier Zhou and Leilei started dancing as well. Both of them had studied in France. She said that Premier Zhou dances like a mathematician. Kind of stiff. Another general, Pang Dehuai, would only watch and not dance. But He Long, another general, he's perhaps the most rhythmic among the Chinese leaders. And Mao Zedong, kind of arrogant and didn't want to dance with me. But eventually, I still managed to convince him and dance on the asphalt. But after that, but unfortunately, that caused a great conflict between him and his wife. That kind of started a dance fad for a while, which lived through the founding of the new China until Cultural Revolution. Merce Cunningham, another example, who I studied, his greatest contribution was introducing I Ching to the Book of Changes to China.
机遇辩护法是他根据易经的这个以变为本的这种思想
which he applied to choreography.
这个摇签落地的，我们觉得像年轻人觉得是算命，那是迷信，但实际上那种偶然性中有必然性的，它有它的科学性。
The idea of
他把它做成一个
uncertainty,
编舞的方法，现在全世界各地的人都在学这种编舞，
which is still being studied today.
出其不意的这样的机会。啊，这个我就不一一的，我都有照片。
I will not list those examples, but another one I would like to, another story is 1972, which is an important year between the two countries. President Nixon came to Beijing and the ballet troupe in China showed him the red detachment of women. Which was incorporated partially in Nixon in China. After the official diplomatic relationship was established, there was a movie. My friend Gloria Strauss, who was very familiar with Chinese dance, she saw this movie and seeing that the equal status between women and men makes her feel that Chinese women have been, are gaining their independence. We've talked a lot. Let me show another something moving. Today, even though our younger dancers have much better conditions, they don't necessarily have the technique as shown in this one. Sorry, not this one. This is the men's army. Men soldiers. Now let's watch. It's hard to imagine back then that women could walk and dance like that. This was groundbreaking to Chinese women at the time.
The red detachment of women. 我在那个 International Dictionary of Ballet 里面有写的 entry， 就这样。好多有趣的东西，大家关注那个论文集。最后有2句话。
Lastly, there are 2 things. One is a request. In Beijing, I have 4 fellows. We studied dance education, and we wrote 300,000 words. We have more research to do. Probably will take 2 years. I've been discussing with NEH. We hope that in America, that you would recommend some expert here in dance to collaborate with us. Secondly, I've been here in the U.S. for many times. I know that there's U.S.-Japan Foundation. There's a U.S.-Russian Foundation. I really hope that taking the opportunity of this, the momentum of this forum, there will be a U.S.-China Cultural Foundation so that we can sustain our exchange and systematically. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. We need another brief AV switch out. As I apologize, as some of you may realize, we have 5 minutes left on this panel and 2 more speakers to hear from. So we're going to go slightly into the break. Hopefully our last 2 speakers will have a chance to share with us their insights, and then we'll break. Are we good on the AV? All right. Next, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Damian WOETZEL, who's the founding director of the Jerome Robbins New Essential Works program, the director of the Vail International Dance Festival, and the cultural programming producer for the World Science Festival. He's also a member of the President's Committee on the Arts and the Humanities, so I'm fortunate to work with him quite a bit. Damian?
Thank you, Rachel. And wonderful to be here, and it's been an enlightening 2 days with more to come, and I will be mercifully brief, I promise. I'll just give you 2 seconds of background. I was a dancer for many years. I was a ballet dancer for about 25 years. I realized as I arrived here in Berkeley, the last times I was here was when I was still dancing. I retired in 2008. I danced over here at the Zellerbach a number of times, certainly in the beginning of my career and then later on as a principal dancer. So I've kind of seen it from a different angle than I'm seeing it today, shall we say. And that, when Billy Xian's comment about art is, which Claire brought up briefly, it's interesting to me. I think it struck a chord with a bunch of us in different ways. But for me, it was, frankly, when I was dancing, art was. It was exactly right. That was that was it. I was dancing. I was in that moment. There was performance. And doing the performance was paramount. That was everything in its own way. It was a world. Not to say that there wasn't preparation and all that sort of thing, but that really was the point. That was everything. Now that I don't dance, it's much more about what art can be, what art might be, what art will be, how can we, what will make it interesting and important in our day. There's been so much talk about history, and rightly so. Maybe not quite as much talk about currency. Again, Claire really brought that to the fore about the ideas of, I think there's an uncomfortable tension in a way, which shouldn't be uncomfortable, but it is a reality between the breadth and weight of the Chinese historical artistic legacy in comparison to, let's say, the American weight, where, I have a minuscule example with my career was at the New York City Ballet, founded by the great Russian choreographer George Balanchine. He passed away, and in the last year since his death, over 20 years, there's been tremendous upheaval over legacy. And it's, compared to the Chinese upheaval over legacy, this is a minuscule comparison. So I think that's of interest somehow in this conversation. And yet, for me, what's important now, and perhaps it's the vanity of being alive, but it's what is now. What is about now? What is it that's the arts today? And that encompasses where I come from in my comments and what I'm gonna do in a minute. To me, the arts are a bunch of things. They're about entertainment, certainly. They're about enlightenment, what you can learn from the arts. They're about exchange as well. And they're probably most importantly to me, in a sense, because I think this is the only way they actually live and flourish, getting back to that currency, they are an experience. How do they get experienced? And there's 2 ways to experience in my world. There's the way where we just did, with everybody sitting down and watching, and there was great variety of expressions on your faces. It was great to sit here and watch it. By and large, humor, joy, kind of pleasure in watching. And there's another way to experience, which is actually to experience, to participate in another way. And so what I want to do is I want to show you a tiny clip. Alex, I'm going to want to show that very first clip, and I'll tell you what it is as it runs. So as soon as you have it, you can go. One of the things I do is I work with Yo-Yo Ma on an education program.
Hold on a second.
And this is a thing we did last spring.
Unexpected.
There
We want to bring in,
are 450
there's one more
sixth
class.
graders in New York City.
Live
And they're being joined by a class from Bangalore.
India, Nrityagram.
And what we did is these kids, over the course of a year, were given various cultural, what I would call interventions, through music, through dance, through storytelling. And they learned their curriculum with the aid of the arts. So it's like learning geography through music, and in this sense, this is the Silk Road project, and we're talking about an Indian phrase of dance, and these kids have all learned it, and now they're going to do it concurrently with these kids in Bangalore. Now, to me, that is experiencing the arts in a very different way than taking these kids to see an Indian dance, which may or may not have an effect. And so that's what I mean when I say experience. And this is on a children's level. And you can just say, oh my goodness, this is great. That's great. Thank you, Alex. If you can now queue up the next one and just give me a high sign when you've got it, because then we'll just move quite quickly through it. So that's an experience from a point of education where the arts, and I think that's particularly relevant to exchange, certainly, between countries, between societies. I mean, there was mention about making the arts a part of people's lives meaningfully, not just the elites. I think that was mentioned earlier today. And that, of course, is direly necessary, not only from an American point of view in terms of my performative work, my producing work. It's all about how can we expand the audience? How can we make this relevant to everybody, not just a certain little section of society? Well, that goes for the world as well. So here, let me just go, Alex, you can go ahead. I'm going to show you one more video from the Silk Road Connect thing, which I think was a really interesting thing we did. Whenever you've got it, you can go. So this is a class. Every school was asked to do something that illustrated how they connected, so to speak. And this school, the Young Women's Leadership Academy in Brooklyn, decided to depict migration through dance.
We start in Africa to begin our migration journey. Our dance symbolizes the birth of humankind. We are all from Africa.
And these kids are now being accompanied by Yo-Yo and the Silk Road. And this is a dance they made together with their teachers. And it's taking them on their path of migration. Now, you should know that they discovered their path of migration by doing DNA testing. That was a part of this as well. So they learned their history, if you will, and they're getting a memorable learning experience through the arts, through dance, through music.
We traveled from Africa to the Middle East in unity. Watch as our traditional Middle Eastern dance takes you through the day of the caravan trader.
And they collaborated with the musicians to make this dance, and then they came together and they did it for their peers. And each school of the 5 schools did a different thing. Some of them explored it through theater, actually, some of them through dance, some through music. There was all kinds of different ways to do it. So I'm just going to let this play and I'll just keep talking, but this is now they've migrated to the Middle East, and eventually they're actually going to go to China, and then they're going to depict how they all came together in New York. Which is, their story, if you will. Now, I would definitely argue that they learned their migratory path a lot better by doing this. And this is one of the ways I think that we can connect and exchange in meaningful ways. Okay, I'm going to cut it because we're so short of time. I'd love to show you more, but it's okay. Thanks, Alex. When you get the iTunes audio, let me know about that, Alex. Alex is my trusty friend back there. So, a couple of things. We started this conference with the wonderful Confucius quote that Chairman Leach mentioned about music and courtesy. And Confucius, to the effect, said, if there was an increased understanding of music and courtesy, we would not have to deal with war. Which is, an amazing thing to come down through the centuries, to say, is it true? Well, let's think about that for a sec. Latter day, President John F. Kennedy, in a Harvard commencement address, said if more politicians knew poetry, we would have a better world. But the other interesting thing he said, there's a second half of the quote was, if more poets knew politics, we'd have a better world. And I actually think that's very relevant to the practitioners in the room, that we have an awareness. We're not living in some ephemeral, other ivory tower artistic world where it doesn't matter. Of course it matters. I mean, some of the things we just saw, are very interesting culturally, and not necessarily artistically at times, but culturally because of their timeliness. So there's a burden on both accounts that arts become a more relevant point. I would say that. I'm not sure. I feel like I should wrap quickly, but because my ultimate message here to you today is that I think this is an incredibly valuable occasion to enable these exchanges, but it becomes far more valuable at the level you participate. There is a ratio of participation in it, not merely studying the problem, but participating in it, making things happen, as Claire described, and looking for ways to be current and available for the kind of meaningful change that makes cultural exchange actually living, like in those kids' faces. I mean, it's easy to see in a kid. You know, it's just like we grow out of our ability to participate in a sense. If you study neuroscience, they say, oh, you have it and then you grow out of it. You learn not to. Alex, how are we doing on music back there? Okay, so what we're going to do right now is we're all going to actually participate. Okay, so everybody stand up. We're going to do a piece of Balanchine's Serenade. This was choreographed in 1933, and this is made for students, actually, so it's perfect for you. It's the first ballet he made in America. Music is Tchaikovsky, and I'm just going to walk you through it, and we're going to do it to this beautiful music, and we'll all have had a shared cultural experience, which I think will, in some ways, bind us. So I'm going to just leave the mic and go over there, because I'll just yell. It'll be okay. Hold it. Okay, they have to learn it first. 1 second. It won't take long. Okay, so we begin, and you imagine yourself on a stage. The curtain is closed. The orchestra has already begun. And the stage manager comes to you and says, all right, the curtain, warning on the curtain. That is your cue. When I say warning on the curtain, you're all going to imagine that you are a grove of orange trees. And, oh, thank you very much. Okay, why not? And what you're going to do is you're going to raise your right hand as if the sun were shining in your eyes, and you're going to shield the sun from your eyes. So you turn slightly that way, and you gaze up at the sun, but that's very beautiful. Okay, so the sun is in your eyes. The next thing you're going to do, and I will talk you through how long this takes. I'll just tell you, it's going to take about 8 counts. It will take 8 counts. You're going to take that right hand, and you're going to bring it to the side of your head. Balanchine apparently said it's like you're getting a headache. So you're going to take 8 counts to get a headache. So the sun has been shining in your eyes, and you bring it to your head. Beautiful. The next thing you do, and I'll just face you, but you can just continue with the right hand, you're going to lower that hand over your heart like this. Very poetic. Beautiful. Okay. Review very quickly. Sun, headache, poetic over your heart. Gorgeous. Okay. Next. We're almost done. You lower that hand to meet your other one, and this is where you're actually all going to become dancers. This is a transformation. You'll lower them both, and you'll just put them like this. Everybody see? Just like this. You're standing normally, hands like this. Get slightly technical here. I'm going to say to you, and feet. And when you do that, you're going to take your feet from a normal standing position, and you're just going to open them slightly. Like you're becoming a dancer. Beautiful. Nicely done, Clea. Almost there. Now we're going to open our arms and our right leg. So if you're me, you're just going to go like this. Your feet, and then you're going to open your hands. You're going to close your feet. Bring your arms forward and open them up. Very beautiful. Okay, that's the beginning of Serenade. After that, they really start to dance. But this, if you ever see, how many have ever seen Serenade in this room? Okay, so now you've seen it, you're going to dance it, and if you ever see an opportunity to see Balanchine's Serenade, you can say, oh, I've danced that, all right? So now, Alex, let's have the music, and I'll give you the warning on the curtain, and when I say warning on the curtain, hands up. Okay. Warning on the curtain. And we're going to hold this for an exquisite amount of time. So I want you just to picture the silence in the theater. Beautiful. We're now going to begin to get a headache. 1, slowly, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now we're feeling a little poetic. Good. 2 hands down. Open your right leg. Now dance serenade. Thank you, Alex. And that concludes my presentation. That's basically, I believe in participation. I believe that's the key to meaningful exchange. And I thank you all for going there with me today. Okay.
Well, thank you, Damian, for your depth, your brevity, and your participation. Right. Finally, I'd like to introduce Leilei, who is the President Assistant of the Chinese National Academy of Arts, the Director of Cultural Development Strategy, and I believe he will talk to us today about film.
Distinguished Chairman Leach and Director Gao, distinguished experts, good morning. Because of the time constraints, I'll try to deliver whatever I need to say within a very short time period. I'd like to, when a cross-cultural exchange, we all know that in this San Francisco, 70 years ago, there was a very important figure. It's not a politician. It's not whether it's an artist. It's a very famous Bruce Lee. He was born in San Francisco, in Chinatown, in a hospital. This year will be his 70. In his whole life, he's marvelous. He was traveling between different cultures. So his technique actually a combine of different. Even his family is between two cultures. So he's been traveling between two cultures, Oriental and then West. Because of his dual cultural identity, so he has created his own personality and his own cultural background. Was the first one who helped to transmit and promote Chinese martial arts in the Western world. Also through film, he was the one to promote the Western style into the Chinese family. So he himself is a combination of the East. He was born in 1940 in San Fran, and yet in 1973 he died in Hong Kong. After he died, his body was buried in Seattle. So his whole life, in fact, he's been traveling, floating between East and West. He never stopped. So here, when we talk about the cross-cultural exchange, I think he's a very important figure that we have to respect and pay attention to. Different culture, how to accept, it relies on the correct understanding of each other's culture, especially for strange cultures, especially for those the cultures that seemingly conflict. We need to use objective ways to understand and of the conflict. Sometimes it's not because the both cannot understand. It's just because of the misunderstanding. It's sometimes because of the different cultural value. It's also because of the error when we try to understand. So this forum, it's a cross-cultural opportunity. We're talking about the past, the present, and the future. So it's a very important forum. During the exchange, because of media, the method, sometimes we probably achieved something that we had not expected at the beginning. Zhen, he went to France. He found that when his work was exhibited, then the European people, they didn't understand his work. So they actually put his works upside down because they didn't understand. So it's a mistake. Both in England, when he analyzed the cultural involvement, he missed in cultural evolution. British scholars said when different cultures meet, one may create stereotype of the other. Stereotype may not necessarily be wrong, but it tends to exaggerate some facts and obliterate the others. For example, When European people paint their native Indians, it usually composite image combining the characters of Indians in different areas, which is simply a general image, generalized. Such combination is usually made according to established cultural customs in different nations. So when we talk about Mr. Li, when he first was in U.S., he did not enter into the film industry. First, he went to Hong Kong as a Tangshan brother. This film, at that time in Hong Kong, created very high box record, even break the whole Chinese film record at that time. But this film, when it become showed in China, it becomes like an angry fist. And when it was shown in other countries, it becomes like glorious fist. So originally, he wanted to use the title to show the brotherhood between Chinese, and yet in the commercial atmosphere in the Western world, it becomes substituted by this violent symbol. Because in the Hollywood, people's person may be a commercialized, violent film. Maybe it's willing to make more money than a movie talk about a Chinese brotherhood. So that's the misunderstanding and distortion of this culture idea. On the platform of international culture exchange, the national images of many developing countries have been stereotyped due to intended distortion as well as misunderstanding caused by different expressions, films. Only like those consumer products, like the wines or cigarettes, only those things can be accepted in this original way. But when you're talking about transmission and translation of culture, it always seems to have something lost because of the misunderstanding, because of the distortion. In the world, a lot of countries, they always want to put themselves in the middle of the map. Since the mid-century, a lot of countries' map, they put themselves in the middle of the map, world map, like Hertford's map. They put Jerusalem at the middle of the world, and then they provide how religious. You can see that at that time how those religious people view the world. So as a cultural symbol, when they make this map, it reflects they want to put themselves in the center. But we know how the world is configured, but different countries, when they make their own map, they make it differently. Li he also worked with Warner. The fight between dragon and tiger. It's the first Eastern Western movie. He acted as a British spy and tried to catch the criminals on the island. People say this is but Mr. Li seems to be acting in different film because American directors, they were not familiar with the Chinese Kung Fu. So they cannot really use the media, this film, to really reflect the real Chinese Kung Fu or the Chinese martial arts. So they actually convey this violence on that martial art or the Chinese Kung Fu, give that taste of violence. They focused on how his muscle on his face twisted, and that's anger. So then becomes Mr. Li's film becomes like, even though that fight between dragon and tiger earned a lot of money for the producer, unfortunately, the brotherhood and then the real spirit of martial art did not take root in the audience heart. And also before that movie was produced or showed in the theater, he actually passed away. So sometimes those misunderstandings, but because people have this stereotype in their mind. Edward Silo, he said, in the humankind mind, we have this feeling that the Westerners has this misunderstanding of the Oriental culture, not only in their novel, in their poet, even in their scientific publications. You can see those misunderstandings. In Europe, people can use Oriental stories, Oriental atmosphere, or the way of Oriental in order to
Oriental world became an invention of the Western, kind of exotic and nostalgic. This kind of imagined culture is rather different from the real East. In the past, we have often been distorted in earlier Western art. That happened quite often. When they described Holland, East Holland, when they came to China, they painted llamas like Catholic priests. The llamas, they changed the artifacts of the llamas into Catholic ones too. And even though the but they westernized China with their own images. At the end of 19th century, the anti-China sentiment had great negative influence on Chinese people, especially first generation immigrants. They had limited opportunities. A lot of them, as we know, they're coolies working on railways. Their income was made in pennies. There was a martial art director. He wanted to make a movie about these coolies in the U.S., Blood and Tears of the Coolies. Unfortunately, he passed away before he was able to make it. So the perception of Chinese art, in some cases, are still being distorted. As you can see, all of the movies that win awards here in the U.S. Are kind of they are limited to certain genres, which would only help to associate China with a certain period of the history in Americans' audience. So this kind of misunderstanding is at the basis of many of our differences in the movie community. Whether that's intentional or non-intentional, quite often in international film festivals, they want to see the closedness, they want to see the old times, and quite often the movies we make that are important to us are of no interest to them. And the ones who do win awards quite often are misinterpreted as well. Even though these winning movies give us a space in the film festivals, the effect is mixed. How can we bridge? How can we clear these misunderstandings? This is urgent. This is of urgency. The ones that win awards both in China and internationally, there's only about an 11% overlap. the gap is rather wide. We have to reflect upon that. Hollywood movies, when they come to China, they have to, even the subtitles, they have to go through their standards. On the other hand, our movies,
比如，西方对中国文化最具代表性的路数是对功夫的意见。在当年李小龙主演的功夫片风行海外以后，中国功夫随之扬威世界。
is very popular.
都出现了一个新的词，叫功夫。现在许多
And kung fu is a well-known word.
代名词。西方人又把
Western audience
技击为主导动作。 以侠义精神为核心内容的武侠电影，
so that becomes all the Chinese that the Western audience know,
在这些影片中，中国武术
and becomes a stereotype.
基本上被眼花缭乱的外部动作
And
覆盖。
the inner essence of the culture is more obliterated by these superficial effects. And you can see the panda here. And the panda here is fed by American-style diet. So you can see the Western audience appears to be interested in kind of the gimmicks, but not the deeper cultural spirit. We're not judging the audience standards, but we are trying to expose such misunderstandings. So the exchanges just like between two lovers, the more that they interact, perhaps the more conflicts that occur. Even in Cultural Revolution, if you don't pay attention to the methods and medium and characters of each other, misunderstanding would happen very easily. How do we find effective methods to limit these understandings? Is a very important task. Economic and trade exchanges can strengthen exchanges, but they cannot replace cultural exchange. So we cannot count on economic exchanges for cultural understanding. Economic exchange can only promote cooperation for interest. Cultural understanding has to be realized through its own means. Through bilateral or bilateral, yeah. Bruce Lee was a bright star in the last century. Even though he only lived 32 years, he left a strong legacy. He brought martial arts. He introduced martial art to the West. Not only in the U.S., there was the Bruce Lee Foundation. In Japan, there is his statue on the web. He lives on the web. In Hong Kong, there is this bronze statue.
Well, thank you. Leilei brings up some interesting and provocative ideas. I wish we had time to take some questions, but I think what probably makes the most sense as we're running about a half an hour behind now is for us to take a very brief break of 5 or 10 minutes. And if you have questions, perhaps you can talk to the panelists then, and then we'll reconvene for the last session with Chairman Leach. Thank you.